Well, next on the program, let's return to a story that's making news this morning about a new kind of court in Winnipeg. It's trying to keep young people out of the justice system by welcoming them into it. It's called Out of Custody Youth Intake Court. The goal is to get young people in front of a judge so they can get their case dealt with, but then also to get whatever kind of help they might need, whether that's moving cases to get through the system as fast as possible, even delaying court hearings until the youth are more ready. As part of a story on the new court, we were invited to follow a 14-year-old girl through the process so we could see how the new system would affect her. I spoke to CBC's Caitlin Garlick about what she saw and heard.
Good morning.
So why don't we start with learning more about the 14-year-old girl that I just mentioned, Caitlin?
Yeah, so first off, like with any young person who's been accused of a crime, we can't identify her, but I can tell you a bit about her. So I met her in court with her social worker last month, and she was there because she'd been charged with assault after she punched a worker at her group home last year. At the time that happened, she was 13 years old and addicted to alcohol. But when I met her a few weeks ago, that wasn't her life anymore. She'd stopped drinking, stayed out of trouble, and got ahead of schedule on her schoolwork. But this assault charge was still really hanging over her. And as she sat in a new kind of youth court that morning, she waited to see what was going to happen to her.
So tell us more about this court and how it's hoping and trying to help young people like this girl that you met.
So for that girl, she was kind of struggling over the last little while about what to do with her case. And one thing that the court was able to do for her was delay it a little bit so that she'd have time to hopefully be able to stop drinking and just get to a place where she really could make that decision for herself. And then once she was ready, because there was a judge and all the lawyers in the same room together, they were able to focus on getting her help and dismissing her charge that day instead of having her wait even longer. And the Youth Intake Court also tries to solve problems in cases from the very start. So, for example, sometimes a youth will show up and need a mental health assessment, or they can't figure out why their legal aid application was rejected. And because the court has, again, all the judge and those lawyers present, they're able to sort out things like that pretty quickly. And for young people who don't show up to court, they've started putting together what they kind of unofficially call the Find Them list, which is sort of what it sounds like, a roster of names they then go through and call to see why they didn't make it to court that day instead of automatically issuing a warrant for them. And for Hilary Tash, a legal aid lawyer who helps run the new court, she says she's often reminded of how very young some of these kids are when she sees their signatures on court paperwork.
A young person's signature can tell us a lot about, where they're at from a cognitive perspective, from a developmental perspective. And so when we see a young person's, little signature that might look like the signature of a 4-year-old, we know that they're going to need support to get to court. They can't do that alone.
How did the court come about in the first place?
So it's been running for about a year now, and there were actually a few different things that led to that change. One of them was that there were such long delays before young people were getting to actually see a judge, and often in that time they were waiting, they were left without any specific lawyer attached to their case and really no connection to the justice system at all. So some of them just stopped showing up altogether, which could mean more charges against them for skipping court. And for those of them who did keep coming, more and more were ending up needing what's known as a conference, which is a meeting where they basically bring everyone who knows a young person together, from guardians and family members to teachers and action therapists, to help come up with solutions in their case. Those conferences can be pretty helpful in a case, but they also take a lot of time and work to do. And at a certain point, almost every single case coming through the courts needed one of them. One other reason was that most, if not all, of the young people who were ending up in court were struggling with some kind of issue that likely played a role in them landing there in the first place, from mental health to addictions to trauma. That's according to Associate Chief Judge Leanne Martin, who was a big part of the drive behind the new provincial courtroom.
If people saw or heard what was going on in their lives and what they were doing, I think might add a little bit of understanding as to why some of the youth find themselves in these positions and why they are offending in the way that they do.
So all of that led to this new process where now, instead of waiting months for a charge to be dealt with, they bring everyone, the judge, the lawyers, the kids, their families, together in a room to sort out issues from the get-go, often now in a matter of weeks. And during the time that I sat in that courtroom, what struck me was the formality of the one side of the room. So you have the judge in their robe, the lawyers in suits, and then on the other side, filling most of the seats in the gallery, were just rows and rows of kids and teenagers in like sweatpants and sneakers. And Hilary Tash, that lawyer that I talked to, said that tension sort of represents what the new process is about. On the one hand, they're trying to show young people the court is serious about their case. It's a real judge, a real courtroom. But on the other hand, they also don't want to intimidate them.
We want to let them know that even if they have been in trouble before, they can do better in the future and that no one has given up on them. I think it keeps them on track when they've been able to see a judge and have that encouragement from a judge on the first day to turn things around.
That approach also translates into how they speak in the courtroom. It's not the same as being in an adult court. In this youth courtroom, you have a lawyer who will be talking about legal issues to a judge at the front of the room, and then they'll turn around and address the young person in the gallery directly and sort of go, "Here's the game plan, bud. Does that make sense?" And just really try to connect with them.
Who are the young people who are ending up in this courtroom?
So these are young people who have been accused of something serious enough that they have been charged with a crime. Often the charges are things like shoving in a schoolyard or shoplifting or damaging property, but they've also been deemed safe enough to be in the community while those charges move through the court. So typically these are not young people who are charged with what we would maybe consider more serious offenses like homicide. Those youth are held in custody. They also really range in age, all the way from 12 years old at the low end up to 18. And for most of them, it's their very first time seeing the inside of a courtroom. And that's part of the idea, right? These are young people who have just barely entered the justice system. They're just at the edge of it. And everyone involved wants to see them never have to enter a courtroom again, hopefully. So what they're trying to do really is intervene early so these young people can hopefully move on and get their lives back on track. It's something Judge Martin, who we heard from earlier, says they keep in mind when they're deciding how to deal with these cases. Sometimes they find all that's needed is something like a reprimand, which is the official term for when a judge gives a young person sort of a stern lecture as a sentence in minor cases. And in other cases, she says charges are just stayed altogether.
And sometimes you get some pretty big smiles from those youth who are otherwise have been doing very well and are able to continue on going to school, leading their lives, and making sure that they don't have to come back to court if it's not required.
Now, you said it's been about a year since this court started. How are things going for young people who've, experienced it, been through it?
Yeah, so far it sounds like they're seeing really good things, including a drop in the number of cases involving young people that are being set for trial. And they're also looking now at whether there's room to expand the court. Right now, it's about twice a month. And for teens like that 14-year-old girl I talked to earlier, it's helped them move on with their lives. So her case has now been referred to restorative justice, something she said was a huge relief after having that one bad thing she did hanging over her for so long. Now she's looking forward to hopefully putting it behind her and thinking about how she might be able to build a different kind of future for herself.
Thank you very much for bringing this to the morning show.
You're welcome.
That is Caitlin Gowerluck, a reporter with CBC Manitoba here, and you can read more on her story on our website at cbc.ca/Manitoba.